Mike, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. I was a ButcherBox, what do you call it? Subscriber for many
Member,
years. Yeah,
member. Yeah.
member. I decided recently to support a local farm. I actually bought a half a cow for the first time.
Yeah.
So, but y'all got me started kind of on this trend of wanting to eat better quality meat. So that's what
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of talk with you about a little bit today, and we'll get into some other stuff. But this whole idea of just get started, a lot of times it not only starts from an idea, which is important, but it's really the execution on that idea, right? There's hundreds of thousands of different ideas you can do. So I'm curious if we can, and I'm sure you've shared this story a little bit, but to provide some context on kind of your starting story of ButcherBox, because if I remember correctly, fact check me, it started from, I think, your wife doing an elimination diet. Was that correct? And that
Yeah.
idea sparked it. So I'm kind of curious. Can you start there, give a little background, and then we'll talk about the execution of the idea?
Yeah. And actually, right where you have ended up, which I want to power someday as well. So my wife and I were following elimination diets. And this is where you take out a bunch of things, like a bunch of foods that might be inflaming your body. And all the elimination diets that we were on said eat grass-fed beef. And we tried to find grass-fed beef. We lived in downtown Boston, and there was like ground beef in the grocery store, and that was it. There were no steaks, there were no like roasts, there was just ground beef. And so I just got obsessed with this idea of like, where do you find grass-fed beef? Like, how do you get grass-fed beef? And just basically searching on the internet. I found some farms that would do grass-fed beef, but then when you got to the last page and it was like they'll ship it to you, it was like $100 extra to ship you like a few steaks. So nobody was doing it efficiently. Omaha Steaks, which was really the only company that was shipping things, didn't do grass-fed beef, and I ended up buying a trash bag full of meat off a farmer in a parking lot. And the farmer had, now I know, illegally crossed state lines because you're not supposed to sell if you're depending on where you get your animal slaughtered, you can't sell across state lines. But he sold it to me out of the back of his car, and the story is that it was too much meat for my freezer, so I ended up selling it to some of the stuff to my friends. And one of my friends was like, "This would be so much easier if it was just delivered to my house." And I was like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." And at the time, I had just come off of 8 years, or was about to come off of 8 years of working in a venture-backed business. I ran a company called CustomMade.com. We raised $30 million of venture capital, and I was really enamored by like the Tim Ferriss 4 Hour Work Week, or this idea of like being a solopreneur and focusing on your lifestyle design first, and then building a business that can support that lifestyle. And I was looking for a hobby. I was not looking to start a big business. I saw a need that I had, which is like, how do you find well sourced meat that's from animals that were treated well, and how do you do that? And if I'm having this problem, I bet a lot of other people are as well. And so that was the impetus of the idea. I started with a lifestyle plan, which is what I tell every entrepreneur to do, which is, put together like a 3-page document of like, what does a perfect day look like? What time are you waking up? Are you getting a workout in? Are you not? Are you there to take your kids to school, or are you homeschooling them, or like what's happening? Do you go to an office? Do you not go to an office? Like, what does your day look like? And I wrote that down, and then fit in what I thought would be ButcherBox into that. And one of the core tenets of my lifestyle plan was that I did not want to raise outside capital. I just, I'd gone through that for a whole host of reasons. I thought it was like really hard and traumatic, and didn't want to do it again. And so I decided I'd start, and it would be small. And if we had 1,000 subscribers, that would be a great business. I could make $20 a month off them, and like have a nice little lifestyle business. We started with a Kickstarter campaign because I figured I didn't want to like front a whole bunch of money to buy inventory, and then like nobody actually wants to buy this. So we launched a Kickstarter in September of 2015. We went out to raise 25,000 in pre-sales, and we did about 210,000 in a 30-day campaign. So like right away, I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. And then we shipped out boxes and then followed up with phone calls and ended up with 300, 400 subscribers, launched butcherbox.com. Actually, at the time it was getbutcherbox.com. And yeah, things just started snowballing in a way that was very, very humbling and unexpected.
Let's go back because that's a really good story. Why were the elimination diet folks saying grass fed beef? Do you like what was the reason grass fed versus the typical you'd get?
Yeah, so a little backstory: 98% of the beef consumed in the United States is grain finished. And most of the grain finishing in this country is done in a large confined feeding operation, which is, what you'd expect, but tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of cows crammed into a small space eating grains that are just distributed via, a tractor that just like lays down grains. And grains, for the most part, inflame the meat. So they inflame. At least that's what the nutritionists were talking about, right? So that if you're eating a animal that was stressed in some way, then that is then causing your body to be stressed in some way, which is why they were saying eat grass-fed beef. I do think that there are grain programs that can work. I'm very anti confined feeding operations, like these kind of massive feedlots. I don't think that that is what's good for the world. But I do think that there is a way to do something like grain finishing, which we have not done yet. We only do grass fed right now. But yeah, there are programs out there that can work and like can be healthy meat that is healthy to eat. But at the time, these elimination diets were like, it was like eat turkey, lamb, or grass fed beef was usually the three that you could actually eat. Everything else was out.
So your buddy or whatever says, this would be cool to be delivered. Like,
Yeah.
because my thing is like a lot of folks will hear that idea, like that's cool, and then life happens,
Yeah.
and a year or two down the road, you're like, oh man, that would have been a cool idea if I did it.
Yeah. Right.
What
Right.
really made you decide to say because I'm assuming, right? I mean, I can only think of just by the sourcing of it. Again, talk about like, are there different regulations across state lines? How do I get
Yes.
meat delivered across the country?
Totally.
So like, tell me,
All this stuff.
yeah,
All this stuff.
like, what were the first few weeks or few months like of ideating around this so that you could start it? Like, did you even start selling it prior to Kickstarter? Like, did you try to do the guy across with the bag type stuff or I'm just kind of curious, like what happened to get you to that point where you're like, this could work. I'm going to try this out in Kickstarter.
Yeah. So, first of all, having been an entrepreneur for the past like 16 years and having been to many a cocktail party where people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I do this. They're like, oh, like, I've got this great idea. Like, I want to start this, whatever. And they're like, I don't really want to tell you because you might steal it. And I'm like, I'm not going to steal your idea. Don't worry. I've got enough issues. And then they tell you, and they're like, I just know this is what I should be doing with my life. And I'm like, great. And then like a year later, it's the same thing. And a year after that, it's the same thing. And they just never get started. And, love the name of this podcast, Just Get Started. I believe like one of my core competencies is I am like very willing to take that first step. In fact, I take it way too often. I would argue like I'm always available for like, let's just get started and see what happens. In this case, the way I did things was very much like the Lean Startup book. And so I had I actually had three businesses that I was thinking about starting. One was a billboard company, one was a bond company, and one was ButcherBox. So there were like three things that I was like, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would do is I would track them like on a Trello board or on a whiteboard. And it's like every week, what's the one thing that would kill the business? So the real estate business was like, I had to figure out how to like get this guy to sell me his billboard. And the bond thing was like a legal thing. And ButcherBox was like, how do you ship meat in the mail? Cause like, I have no idea how to ship meat in the mail. So, week one of playing around with it was like calling, just researching and being like, where do people ship this stuff? And like getting a box. There was like a Groupon for a box of meat. So I got that delivered and then tried to like reverse engineer how that happened. And I kept hitting dead ends. And so I almost was like, this is not something to pursue. But then I I reached out to the former head of operations of Omaha Steaks.
Mm.
I like found his name in an article and was like, oh, I'll just reach out to him on LinkedIn. And he was like, yeah, I'll talk to you. I don't have a non-compete and I'd be happy to talk to you. And that he then was like, I know which farms you can go to. I'm a big believer in this idea. Here's like a resource to ship things out. Like he found me all the pieces. He put all those pieces together. Without him, I don't think I would have started the company.
Wow.
So it was, and it was after that that I was like, okay, we're going to prepare for a Kickstarter because, but then it was like, okay, so I hired an intern because I had just been running a company with 60 people. And I knew if it was just me by myself, like I would just lay on the couch and quote unquote be working, but I wouldn't be. And so I had an intern working for me for $11 an hour. And job one was like, go stand outside Whole Foods and ask people if they buy grass-fed beef. And if so, what price do they pay and what price would they pay? And would they have something delivered? And he was like a freshman in college. And so he just used that he was out of college. He's like, hey, I go to Babson College. Like, I'm just asking these questions. And everyone answered him because he was a college kid. And we just got a whole bunch of information. And then we're like, okay, we just continue to refine it. But one of the things that I think is really important is if you work backwards and you're constantly trying to kill the idea, you end up like de-risking it every step of the way. So I didn't really take much risk on this business before launching the Kickstarter. I was willing to lose $10,000. So I spent that out like on my intern and on a videographer and on somebody to help me like with the Kickstarter. But that was it. And then it wasn't until after we launched the Kickstarter, it was like, okay, now we need to like put in a meat order and, like do all these other things, finalize our website. Like we actually have a business now. Like, okay, let's get moving. So I think the best entrepreneurs I know are really into de-risking things. And a lot of people think that first step, like just getting started, is really risky. And I think just getting started is like one of the least risky things you can do, as long as you like don't take a huge swing out of the gate. It's just kind of like just do a little bit, see if this idea is going to stick, see if the idea is going to stick, and just keep kind of moving slowly within that direction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's come up a lot, obviously, in this podcast because of calling it "Just Get Started," and I've learned this in my career as well. Is that it's actually not as hard if you understand, to your point, that you don't have to. You aren't trying to build ButcherBox week one to be what it is today. It's
Yeah.
you're just trying to take that first small step. Just like, let me ideate a little bit here. I like the idea of prototyping. Like, let me do a small sample size. Do I even like doing this type of work? I mean, kind of what Kickstarter was, right? Because if that flopped, you might have been like, God, is this
That
even
would have been
here?
it.
Yeah, is this even here? Okay, move on. But at least you can say, hey, I attempted it. And I think that's where a lot of folks get stuck, is that attempt for some, like, do you find, and you mentioned that's like something you've been good at, you take that first step a lot. Do you find, is that innate? Is that something like you just had, or is that something you think you developed? Maybe that was part of your upbringing and something that you developed, that muscle. Like, I'm kind of curious with yourself and then folks you talk with, like, because the folks that struggle, is it just fear, or is it this? They just haven't had the experience yet that you might have or someone else might not have.
Yeah, I think it's mostly fear. I think the idea of starting something, sticking your neck out and having it flop feels really, really overwhelming to people. And I don't know. I don't know if it's something that I was like born with or something that I built. I did do a lot of sales growing up. So, everything from I was like a peanut vendor at Fenway Park.
Yeah.
I used to work at a magic shop. I printed my own T-shirts and sold them like basically with a big box on my shoulder, selling them at outside sporting events or in bars. And so rejection was something I was very used to, and something that I knew was just like, it's just one step of the process. It's like, yeah, fine, reject me. That's fine. I'll just find someone else. And like when it's really cold out and you have Diet Coke and you're in the bleachers of Fenway Park trying to sell Diet Cokes that nobody wants, you're just getting rejected by everybody. It sucks. But you learn that like it doesn't mean anything about you.
Yeah.
And I think that people just take their business ideas way too seriously. If there's one thing to like that I would love to leave like wannabe entrepreneurs with, those that are just getting started, is first of all, I think that people don't spend any time on their lifestyle plan. And I think that's the most important thing you can do as an entrepreneur is like write down the type of lifestyle that you're looking for. Because what most people do is they just try to like write a business plan, like, oh, here's my business and this is going to be $1 billion opportunity. And it's like, very few of these things actually get to $1 billion. And so like, maybe just start with a lifestyle plan. Like, what do you want out of this? What's the point? Like, why are you doing this? And then you can put a business plan on top of that. Oftentimes I talk to people and they're like, well, like I started being an entrepreneur because I wanted to be my own boss. And it's like, yeah, but then you went and raised a bunch of money and now you have all these VCs breathing down your neck and like, you're not your own boss. And I just wish that you had taken a little bit of time and like written down what you were actually looking for and what you intended to do,
Yeah.
because now you're just in a pickle, where like the reason why you started this is like at odds with how you're running it.
Yeah.
And that's no fun. That was my first company. It was like the reasons why I started it, the motivations I had, and where I ended up were completely at odds with each other.
Yeah, I think and the word that comes to mind when you say the lifestyle plan, because I love that, is there's a maturity with it. Because I think when we're younger, it's all about, hey, am I gonna be the top dog? Am I gonna be making a lot of money? There's this kind of this showcasing, if you will, of keeping up with the Joneses. And I think as we mature, I mean, maybe not everyone goes through this, but I know I certainly did, and maybe you did too, is like you get this maturity of like, I don't need all that shit. Again, we were talking a little bit before the thing, like, I want to pick up my son from school. I want to do these things that are important to me and make me happy. It's not about the glitz and glamour anymore. And I think
Yeah.
when you start realizing that, yeah, it almost changes. Yeah, why do I want to grow $1 billion company? What's the point of that? Because
Right.
that brings a lot of other friction in the process.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, I think that entrepreneurship, the way in which entrepreneurship is taught in this country, is a very perverted view of entrepreneurship. Like what true entrepreneurship is in my mind. Like one is this idea, like if you're not working 24/7, 365, like you're not giving it your all. It's like that's bullshit. Like most of the successful entrepreneurs I know, like they have like the most time of anybody.
Yeah.
They're like, sure, surfing weekend, no problem. Like because they've like managed their business around the lifestyle that they want to have. Right. And, another one is like raising money. So we never raised money. I think when you see most people's interaction with entrepreneurship right now is like Shark Tank,
Mhm.
which is all about raising money. It's all about diluting yourself to bring in a shark to like, help you with your idea. And it's like you see some of these and it's just like, gosh, like, why are you raising money? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. You're
you
right.
should just not raise money. That would be a good idea.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that there's this view that you have to raise money, you have to hustle, you have to sacrifice everything, sacrifice your health, sacrifice your family, sacrifice being a dad or a mom, and like that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You need something that's like in sync with the rest of your life.
Hmm.
And like maybe that means I won't be the next Elon Musk, and maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
But we look at these people, and it's just like, oh, they gave everything. It's like that's not normal. That's like not your normal entrepreneur.
Yeah. You talked about, let's talk about ButcherBox going forward, but I do want to circle back on the billboard company and the bond company. Like,
Yeah,
what happened to those? You just decided to flop those, or
yeah. The billboard company was, I mean, basically the idea was a lot of the billboards in this country were going digital. And what that means is that there's 6 times the amount of real estate because those boards like change ads every 10 seconds.
Mhm.
So and there was like one company that was running most of the digital billboards. So the idea was a piece of software that you could put in that would like buy the remnant space. Because if you watch digital billboards, even today, a lot of the ads are for nonprofits. And that just equals remnant space. It means that like they weren't able to sell the space.
Hmm.
I think that's a pretty interesting opportunity, and one in which I So the idea was we were going to buy, somebody in Boston had a few billboards. We were going to buy the billboards off of him and then build the technology, like learn on our system and then spread it out. But he ended up like not being interested in selling to us. And then, it was like, okay, didn't work. The bond business, I love this idea. If somebody does this, please reach out to me, because I'd love to be an investor or whatever. There's something like $30 billion of treasury bonds, like that people used to buy. Like I'm 42. When I was a kid, like, for your birthday, you get like a $50 treasury
Right.
bond.
Yeah.
There's $30 billion of those that have matured and are like in people's sock drawers. And so what ended up happening is my father-in-law was saying to my wife, he's like, hey, good news. I found like these treasury bonds in our safety deposit box, and there's like a few $1,000s. And it's like, great, let's cash them. Well, it used to be you'd go to banks who sold them to you, and they would cash them for you. They don't really cash them anymore. So like, there's not a way to cash them.
Hmm.
And so what I wanted to build was the cash for gold, but for treasury bonds,
Interesting.
right? Where you take a photo of your treasury bonds. We give you an offer. Oftentimes it's like a $50 note, but it's actually worth $100. So it's like, you could show me $1,000 worth of treasury bonds, but they're actually worth like 2,000. So we could offer you 1,500. You're like, hell yeah. FedEx envelope comes, you send it to us, we verify it, and make the spread. I thought that was pretty cool. And so like, I don't know. The whole pitch was going to be, the government has your money. Don't you want it back? I thought that was a really good idea, but yeah. So that, I couldn't get past legal, like, no, banks are not allowed to make money off of the cashing of a treasury bond. So then it was like, oh, well, maybe we'll be a power of attorney. But then there was all this thing about power of attorney. So I kept cycling on like trying to figure out how to like make that work,
Yeah.
which I never actually figured out.
Hmm. Well, I think you made a good choice. At least it looks it looks like it.
Yeah.
What was the biggest hurdle? So again, you did the Kickstarter, and obviously you had that help from the Omaha Steaks guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what was the biggest hurdle after the Kickstarter landed and you had to start actually shipping this stuff out, and all of a sudden revenues over years started growing? Like, what if you look back and you're like, holy crap, I never knew this was going to be the biggest problem? What was that?
Well, I mean, this isn't necessarily what you're looking for, but I think that, when you start out in a company, at least me, like it's always about like, what's the next milestone? It's like, oh, I'll feel better about myself when we're at 1,000 subscribers, or like, okay, that didn't work, 10,000 subscribers. And so for me, it was like, I think when we're at $1 million a month in revenue, like I'm gonna probably like, I'm not sure that I can like keep running the company.
Mm.
And I had a mentor who was like, "Well, I think you should set your sights a little higher than that." And I hit 1 million in a month, and I was like, "Okay, but at 100 million, I'm not going to be the right guy." And so I think the hardest thing for me has been the recognition that regardless of how successful we are, like I never feel like, okay, I'm doing a good job. Like your head trash just continues, right? Like, so really it's about building practices of like, like just being happy with where you are, finding the wins every day. That's like a big thing that has been consistent. Like when we launched Kickstarter, and then when we launched our website, and then all along the way, it was really like, um, catching up my mind with the success that the company was having. Because I did not expect this to happen. It was kind of like, holy cow, like what's going on here? And it was just grow, grow, grow.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that's one big one. Then tactically, like business wise, the thing that is the hardest when you're bootstrapping a company is cash, and specifically like your cash, like what they call the cash conversion cycle, or in our case, we have inventory. So how do you grow and not run out of money? How do you market and not run out of money? And then how do you have inventory and not run out of money? Like that was a big, big, big concern, and continues to be a concern. So uh, oftentimes, like for us, we started out. I didn't want to raise money. We shipped a box that was curated, and what that meant was like, you're going to get a box. We're going to choose the 5 cuts that go into it and just ship it to you. Why did we do that? That was like very different than anyone else was selling online. Everything else was like, you can just choose your stuff. The reason why we did that was because I didn't want to carry excess inventory. And so if I was like buying ribeyes and guessing how many ribeyes we were going to sell, I'd be wrong and we'd have a bunch of ribeyes in the freezer. If I curated the box, it was like literally that week, it's like, okay, we're producing these things and shipping it out, and I never have inventory. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then we negotiated with the people who were cutting and shipping the inventory to give us 30-day terms. And then we'd pay them late on that. So it ended up being about 45 days. And so they would produce product, put it in our distribution center. We would ship it out, have already been paid for it, and then get like 30 days of float before we had to pay the bill. And so if you're like, I don't want to raise money, then you need to operate the company as if you didn't raise money, which means you just have to like figure those things out. That is one of the things that I find that people don't really necessarily pay the most attention to. I like to say that like, if you're on the venture capital train, like great, be on the venture capital train. If you're on the bootstrapping train, you're on the bootstrapping train, but don't make the mistake of like thinking you're on the bootstrapping train, but like operate as if you're on the venture capital train. Like you can't do that. You'll fail. And so, yeah, cash conversion and managing my head would be the two things that I've found to be the most challenging.
I want to go back to the headspace for a second, but first question though is around what you mentioned there about the bootstrapping versus raising capital. Do you find that most folks, I had Jason Fried on yesterday, and we were talking about like trying to be profitable, and that's all that matters. Like it doesn't matter. I think a lot of folks, would you agree that they go out and try to raise money, but they haven't even shown that their business can be profitable yet?
Right. Yeah.
Like, do you find that they almost get ahead of their skis instead of actually building the business?
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, that happened in my first company. My co-founder and I, we ran a company called Custom Made. It was a listing service for custom stuff. And we had a pretty nice business on our hands. It was like a Yellow Pages with a portfolio. And we weren't quite profitable. We had raised a little bit of money to buy the site. But we were getting pretty close, and we would have turned a profit. But then we were like, everyone's raising money. Like we should raise money. And so we went out to raise money, and all of a sudden we got on the venture capital train. It was like we raised 2 million, and then 5 months later we raised 4 million, and then a year later we raised 18 million. And it was just like all this capital coming in. But like we didn't we never had product market fit. We were never profitable. I think what's happening right now in D2C is like a reckoning on that. Like if you look at the companies that are publicly traded or the companies that are out trying to raise money, it's like, there was easy money for a while in direct to consumer. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, you need to get profitable. And these founders are like, we don't know how to do that. Like, that's not how we've built anything. I think that makes it really challenging. Meanwhile, the companies that have focused on profitability, generally bootstrapped, or I just heard this term venture strapped, like you take one round and then you run, are doing much better in D2C because from the beginning they had to figure out a way to make money.
Yeah. You figure out those efficiencies, like where you can't just cut corners. It's like, okay, I got to look at this area. And sometimes I think it's putting that accountability mirror up, probably, right?
For sure.
Like, yeah, how can I tweak this a little bit versus just having money save me for the next few months or year or two, and then all of a sudden it blows up in your face?
Yeah, like if you don't have money, I mean, this is like a simple example, but one that I'm asked to be on like boards or like advise companies and whatnot. And I go in there and I look at their numbers and I'm like, oh, credit card fees, 3.1%. Like, have you ever renegotiated your credit card fees? Well, yeah, no, I don't think they do that for people our size. I was like, I renegotiated my credit card fees every quarter, like all throughout, because it's negotiable. It's a commodity. And even if you're working with like a Stripe or whatever, like they negotiate that. So, and if you're in if you're in a company that you haven't raised money, like the 10 basis points that you might save by negotiating yet again for like, on credit card fees, that might not seem like a big deal. But when you're like trying to be profitable, that's a big deal. Yeah. And so it's just the mindset is just completely different. And one of the things that I think that we did really well here at ButcherBox is like we negotiated everything all the time, down from the cardboard that the box is made from to the tape that goes around the box to the credit card fees and everything in between. We negotiated hard for everything, and we still do, because that's where a lot of the money is made.
Mm.
So like, if cash is king, they say like cash is king. I think the pawns are like negotiating with vendors.
Mm. Interesting.
That's how you save the cash.
So let's go back to the headspace, because I'm always intrigued by that, where someone from the outside looks like, hey, really successful
Yeah,
in this business.
crushing.
Yeah, and inside you're like beating yourself up like a boxing match. So like,
Yeah.
what do you do to try to keep your sanity, I guess? Is there any practices you do? Is there any self-talk? What do you
Uh,
focus on?
I do a lot of stuff. So first and foremost, I think I'm a big believer in the Enneagram, which is like a personality test. There are 9 different types, and there are ways to look at how we sabotage ourselves and bring ourselves from a state of like love and joy and curiosity into a state of like threat. I follow a woman, Diana Chapman, who's part of Conscious Leadership, and they have this whole thing about a line, and you can either live a life above the line or below the line.
Mhm.
And above the line is like joy, love, curiosity, and below the line is like fear and anxiety and like trying to control the situation and feeling like you're under threat. And the reality is that our brains are hardwired to bring us below the line. So it's like more often than not, you will be operating from a place of threat rather than a place of like love and joy and open heartedness. And so it's really like trying to, as many times as possible, check in and be like, where am I right now? Am I above the line? Am I like really grateful for this opportunity? Am I feeling a lot of joy and gratitude? Or am I like, ugh, like, what's the threat? And what's the fear? And recognizing that our brains are hardwired to keep us safe, and they put us down below the line often. So how do I stay above the line? I do a lot of exercise. That's one way. I'm a big fan of like rucking, big fan of lifting and stuff like that. But rucking has been really good. I love being in nature. I like trying to be slow, like being slow with my kids or being slow with friends, just like not trying to accomplish a lot, just like be slow, be chill, play the guitar. I'm also a big believer in medicated journeys. It's been really helpful for me, but this is like where you go with a guide and do like a psychedelic thing. That's been really interesting. But it's just kind of constantly inquiring on like, how are things going? And, I would have thought that the more successful I was, the more quiet, like the negative, thought patterns would be. That's not been the case. If anything, the more successful I am, the louder it gets. And that's my experience with most people who are in a position of like success, is like, "Oh, I would have thought like once I hit this, I'd be fine." And it's like, it's worse now. Like, what's going on? And I think that really has a lot to do with, it's you got that like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where it's like food and shelter and friends and all that. And at the top is like self-actualization. It's like really understanding like your true self. And the people, like the approach that I've taken to like march up the hierarchy of needs and have everything that I possibly wanted, the family, the great company, the this, the that, it like doesn't work for that last piece, like the top of the pyramid, where it's like you're trying to figure out like, I don't know, just like self-actualization is more, it just takes a much more gentle approach. And yeah, I mean, coaches, mentors, I'm in YPO, but I think also just trying not to take myself very seriously and focusing on the things that are to me really important: my family, my health,
Yeah.
all those things.
I think at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, that's kind of it. Like I look at like relationships and experiences are kind of like the lifeblood. Like if you have great relationships, if you have awesome experiences, you're rocking, you're doing stuff, like most of the time we're fairly happy. I think it's when we only work, right? Or only drag
Yeah.
ourselves into these things that maybe we don't love as much, is where we get offline. So I certainly
Yeah.
agree there. What?
Well, I love the quote that expectations minus reality equals suffering.
Mm,
So it's like either your expectations need to be dialed down, your reality needs to be dialed up, or you need to be okay with suffering. But like, that's
yeah.
it's a pretty interesting framework. I love it.
Do you often go back? So you talk about the lifestyle plan, and we kind of started with that, and then maybe this is a good place to end. How often do you go back and rewrite that or think about that?
Every 3 years. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in writing a vision for the company, but also like checking in with the lifestyle plan and making sure that it fits in with like what you want. And so I recommend a 3 year vision for the company, kind of like, hey, and it's a creative writing exercise. It's like, oftentimes you want to like be in the woods and let your heart talk versus like writing like hardcore numbers down. And you just want to like have that check in with your lifestyle plan. So yeah, every 3 years is that'd be my prescription for people.
Mm. What's changed on yours since you first wrote it when ButcherBox
Yes,
started?
it's interesting because like going back to the beginning, like I thought this was going to be a hobby.
Yeah.
Like I knew I was going to start a big company someday, but I didn't think this was going to be the big company. This was supposed to be like cover my nut so then I can go figure out what's next. And I like to like equate it to like if I feel like I'm like Simone Biles's parents, like Simone Biles, the famous
Right.
gymnast. I just imagine her parents, like she's 3 years old and she's doing backflips, and they're like, okay, I guess we're gonna get into gymnastics now. It's just like I think starting a company is a lot like birthing a child. And anyone who has kids knows that like you don't really get to decide what they are. You can put up some guardrails and you can keep them safe. But this idea that like, I'm going to raise a mathematician or a chess champion or whatever, forget it. That's not how raising kids works. Like they have their own soul and they want to be whatever they want to be. I think it's the same thing with a company. And so, like, I did not have expectations for ButcherBox like the expectations that ButcherBox had. And largely like now I'm kind of in service of this beast that was created, right? It's like it wanted to be something bigger. The timing was perfect. Like the mission was right. Transforming meat is a huge like goal. So I'm now like, okay, well, I don't want to lose like the lifestyle I want to have. So it's really like checking back in and being like, okay, like what's changed? I now have kids. I didn't have kids then. My life has changed, and just making sure that I don't lose myself in the process. Because if you sacrifice like yourself,
Mhm.
you'll find that like the company will just take all of your time. Like if you don't create boundaries between like your family and being a great husband and your health and your general well-being and wellness, if you don't like honor that needs to be a huge portion of what you do and care about, your business will just eat it alive. It'll just, especially if it's growing like ButcherBox did. It's like it's this constant tug. I could be at an event or at some sort of like founder retreat or speaking at some college like every week. I could be gone all the time, and I could convince myself that that was the most important thing to do for the mission.
Right.
And so I'm constantly reminding myself of like, no, like what I want, that's not what I want. I want to be home for dinner.
Yeah.
I want to be super involved in my kid's life. I want to be a great husband. I want to be working out almost every day. Like those are things that are important to me. And yeah, I think you just got constantly reassessing like how am I doing compared to how I said I wanted to do.
Mm. Yeah, I think the boundaries are absolutely needed. Otherwise, you're right. You kind of just get sucked in and think it's got to be work, 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 or life's not important, or so like all of a sudden there's no meaning there. So what you I want to end on this because you actually mentioned it earlier about, hey, when it gets to a certain spot, I probably should step aside. I shouldn't be running a company
Yeah.
this big. Do you think about stepping aside, or do you see this thing continue growing and you want to run it?
Yeah. So I first of all, we haven't raised any money, right? So there's really like, and I don't have any plans on selling it or going public. I'm more interested in trying to transform meat, like transform an industry that's in desperate need of transformation. and whatever comes comes. And so my current perspective on like, so what does that mean for me? That means like that could be a multi-decade plan, right? And like I'm probably not the person to run it. Like let's say it's going to take 50 years. Like, okay, I'm not the right person to run it for 50 years. So I will have a last day as well. Currently I am, in my own sick way, which is, as I'm like, okay, well, I want to see this thing to $1 billion. Like, I think starting a company and running it from 0 to 1 billion sounds like pretty cool. So, okay, like I'll do that. Whether I can make it, like whether we can actually get to 1 billion, like whether something else happens. I mean, there's a lot of like what ifs, but right now it's kind of like I'm locked in, and I think that certainly for the next several years, I would love nothing more to run this company and to run it and continue to change lives and transform the industry.
Hmm. What's next for y'all? Is there any new products that you're trying to put out, or new ways
Yeah,
to do anything?
we
Or
have yeah we have a bunch of new stuff. So we launched a dog food company, which is pretty
I
cool.
saw you eating dog
We
food.
Yeah, yeah, I ate some dog food. We acquired a company called Truffle Shuffle that does live recipe classes. Like, so it's Michelin star chefs teaching you how to cook. On the ButcherBox side, we are expanding our meats. So we have this really great domestic program that we're starting with pasture raised, grain finished, which is something that we increasingly are being asked for. So we're like, okay, we found a great program. We're going to launch that. And then you said at the very beginning, you were a ButcherBox customer, and then you found a local farmer,
Mhm.
and you bought a farm share or a cow share.
Half a cow, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I think ButcherBox has a role to play in that.
Mm.
And I think that if we truly want to transform meat, we need to make it really seamless for somebody like you to, find a local provider, but like know the difference between the three local providers and then transact on our platform. And like that is pretty interesting too. That's probably further out, but that is definitely something that's pretty interesting. And then it's just like launching new products, delighting our customers, finding new ways to interact with them, and yeah, just repeat.
Mm. Yeah, I'll tell you that, like, I did a lot of research on, I'm in North Carolina, so I looked at, there's probably a dozen different farms, and like, yeah, wait, well, how do they do things this way or whatever? It was a lot of time invested in it.
Right.
I was kind of
Right.
curious about doing this. I got my freezer, like, but yeah, so I think there is an interesting role of like, how do you make it easy to get really from the farm to directly to the consumer potentially?
Yeah.
I was fortunate
Yeah.
they
And
delivered it for me, but not everyone does that. So
yeah. Yeah. And that was actually like the initial idea was connecting farmers to consumers, because that was very similar to custom made, where we were connecting local craftsmen with consumers.
yeah.
And at the time I was like, well, really what I want to do is like help customers. And so we decided to go with like a more centralized model where like we're the brand and we're shipping it out and we do all the work with farmers. But now, as we have gotten to a size, and as we hear over and over about customers such as you who are like, I used to be a subscriber, or I'm leaving because I want to like support a local economy, that's becoming a more and more and more important. And truly, like, we're seeing the decline of the US farm across like pigs, beef, chicken, all of it. And I think that we have a place to play in that world, and I think that could be a really interesting. That's going to be a really interesting next evolution for us.
Mm. That's awesome, man. I'm excited for what you guys are doing. I mean, you're doing a lot of good for the world and bringing
Yeah, thank you.
home, which is cool. So, where can people say hello to you if they want to say hello online? Where do you spend the most time?
So I'm on Twitter at Mike Salguero, Salguero. That's probably the easiest. And then obviously you can find me on LinkedIn. And if people want to email me, CEO@butcherbox.com.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much, man. That's a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.